Welcome into Off the Hook Sports. I am Caleb Calhoun. Dave is out today with a sinus infection. No judgment from me. I had one of those last week, and I will tell you those things suck. I'm going to keep getting them too because my son just brings home everything from daycare. Pretty much how my life works at this point. The show represented to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win, why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, www.banksandjones.com. I am live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville. New and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. We've got a big show on tap today. We're going to talk about something that has happened with other schools, and I'm wondering if it should happen with Tennessee, which is, should the Vols hold a spring game but not televise it? Yeah, that's a little crazy, but there are some thoughts about that. Brew McCoy said something very interesting at the NFL Combine as it relates to Tennessee currently. And that one interesting thing is Deshaun Bishop. Could Deshaun Bishop be the Vols' best running back going forward? Just saying, I'm not a believer. Maybe I can be corrected because Brew McCoy said something revealing about that. Do the basketball Vols, are they a lock for a number one seed? If the season ends today, are they a number one seed, or do they still need help? Is there a tricky path to get there? I'm going to break a lot of that down. The Lady Vols in the SEC tournament, what do they need to do in the SEC tournament to host a game in the NCAA tournament? We're going to get to that. And then we're going to close with a couple of major stories. The ACC and Clemson the ACC's reached a settlement with Clemson and Florida State. There's a lot of impacting the college football world with this. I'm going to break down everything that happened. I wrote a column on it yesterday. You'll be very intrigued by that. And Greg Sankey seems to be declaring open war on the college football playoff committee. And honestly, it's kind of intriguing. It has to do with an interview he just recently had on Paul Feinbaum. We're going to talk a little bit about that because some of the stuff he said was very interesting. So let's go ahead and dive in. Again, we're live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville, new and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. We start with today's tough question, brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win, why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. Should Tennessee football hold a spring game but not televise it? Now, let me explain where I'm going with this. We've had a few debates recently about spring games and the concept of it. Many schools are canceling their spring games. Many schools across the country are canceling their spring games because of the issue of tampering. There is a paranoia among coaches that holding a spring game allows other schools, coaches, representatives, whatever, to not just tamper with players at the game, but use it to try to find some sort of information, particularly if it's televised, where they could scout teams. It's a little weird to me, but that's something that they're doing now. In response to this, some schools have canceled their spring games straight up. Others are doing something interesting, and Alabama is doing the most interesting thing. Alabama has decided to hold their spring game, their A-Day game, that's what it's called, but not televise it. Now, the thinking here is this, and it's a weird thinking, but the A-Day game, fans will still be able to attend. Everybody will still be able to show up, but they're not going to put it on TV. Now, theoretically, I guess the thought is not putting it on TV would assure that there's no way to get a recording of the game to study what some of the teams are running. You might respond that, okay, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing for them, but at the same time, can't somebody just in the stadium evaluate what they're running and take notes? And can't somebody just film it? Well, not if the Con Stallions rules are in place. What if they say no cameras in the stadium? I mean, you ever been to a comedy show? They allow no cameras in the comedy show. So the question is this: should other schools follow suit? Should Tennessee hold a spring game but not televise it? Is that the win-win that you get, where you still get the fan involvement for the spring game? You get fans being able to show up, having fun. I mean, the spring game used to not be televised anyway. I mean, this is a relatively new thing. I would say maybe 25 years old. And on national TV, we're not even talking 10 years old at this point. So if Tennessee, and they haven't started spring practice yet, were to hold a spring game to allow the fans in, could they not televise it, not allow cameras in, not allow anything in to film it, including in the press boxes, and keep it under wraps where you couldn't actually send any tape to study to any coaches? That's an intriguing thought. And a stadium that size, I don't know if that's possible. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. But it is a win-win because, look, here's the problem with canceling spring games for a lot of schools. This is a big fan experience for a lot of people. You allow players to meet with fans. You allow people who maybe can't go to a game during the season to enjoy a little bit of football action in March or April. There's just a lot of good things that come from this. But if you're going to sit there and just straight up cancel the spring game, well, in that scenario, one, in Tennessee's case, you actually take away a chance at some money because the spring game is a good way to generate revenue, which is a big deal. But more importantly than that, not only are you taking away a chance to generate some money, but you're also kind of creating resentment among the fans. Those terms. And again, nobody's going to be mad that you're not televising the game. How many people actually watch these spring games to begin with? I mean, the televising of the game seems like a money grab in general. So who cares if it's televised? You know, people at the game will have to be the ones to cover it and say what happened. I would say that, look, that's not a bad compromise. I don't think Kalen DeBoer is that. I don't think it's that ridiculous for Kalen DeBoer to do it. Now, I'll say this much. There's only so far you can go with stopping tampering and stopping people filming your opponents. I think this day and age in college football, I'm just going to be honest with you guys, it's become so much like the NFL that it's going to be harder and harder to hide what you're doing. I used to think the NFL all ran pro-style offenses that were more player-driven because the players were just too good, so no schemes could get around it. I'm starting to wonder if that was just the case because everything NFL teams do is so open that it has to be player-driven. I mean, just a thought. And is college football going to go that way? Is college football better if it goes that way? I'm not so sure. That's a topic for another day, but I mean, does anybody really think that college football is better off if you don't have unique coaches running unique schemes consistently? I mean, isn't that kind of what makes the sport so much fun? Is so many teams have different styles of play, which is so wildly different from the NFL? I would think so. And if you can't stop the tampering, is that going to continue? I mean, that's kind of the issue here. So, you know, it's an intriguing thought. I'm not so sure where it ends up, to be fair, but holding a spring game and not televising it does seem like, I guess, it could be a decent compromise if you're able to make sure that nobody in the stadium is actually filming those games. And again, I think it's very difficult. David Speaks says spring games draw fan interest, and this can negatively impact your fan base. There's so much entertainment now. It could detour considering CFP is regional. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't know, but again, David, like, are you talking about getting rid of a spring game in general or not televising it? Because I'm not so sure televising it really brings in any fans. And this is why I think what Alabama's doing with the A-Day is actually kind of smart. It's an experimental thing. My question is, does it really stop people from... Okay, the real fear of the spring games is that having something like that so open to the public, some opposition can come in and film what you're doing, particularly if it's televised, and let everybody else, and then, you know, kind of get a leg up studying you. That's why teams are canceling it. DeBoer's theory is if you just don't televise it, well, they may see what you're doing, but without the tape to analyze it, there's nothing they can do. It's got to be recorded. So the question is, can they stop the recording? David, you say both in the question I was asking. Okay, so you think it should be televised and exist. I just think having it exist is not going to hurt the fans that much. I'm not televising it. I don't think people are going to be upset. I don't think, David, where I disagree with you is your casual's not sitting down and watching a spring game and going to get hooked on college football with that. It's going to be your big fans. I mean, you know, think about baseball for a minute. Spring training is such a fun event for a lot of people. A lot of fans follow their teams to spring training. It's not what's drawing in new baseball fans, I'll tell you that. Now, an interesting quote from Adam. I feel like we worry too much about what everyone else is doing, wanting to be a leader while acting like a follower. Adam, true, but that's just the way college football is now. I mean, everybody's worried about what everybody else is doing. I mean, everybody in Knoxville still to this day believes that Connor Stallions cost them the game against South Carolina. And Ollie Lane said some interesting things that make us believe that in 2022, Tennessee would have gone to the college football playoff had South Carolina not benefited from the Connor Stallions scenario. There's a lot of validity to that argument. David Speak says ESPN has a Tennessee Day, Bama Day, which they would play the spring game, etc. Yes, I get what you're saying, David. You can still have like the day dedicated to big games from the teams. I don't think the spring game, watching it itself, though, is going to draw in fans. I want to talk a little bit about this more in a second, but I want to set up the poll question real quick. First, I want to make the point that the show is represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win. Why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com. We'll be right back.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott.
All right, the poll question is up. What should Tennessee football do with its spring game? Cancel it, keep it, but don't televise it. Keep it and televise it. You guys let me know. There's a lot to debate here on this. I think that there is a legitimate argument with wanting to keep things under wraps. Now, in terms of Josh Heupel's offense, and we've heard this from a lot of people on our message boards, and you guys might be right, the lack of creativity, it's just a system offense, so you may not need you may not be hiding anything. You may not need to hide your spring game. It's kind of like, I mean, it's totally different, but like the triple option offense back in the day, that was a system that they ran 4 to 5 plays and reacted to what the defense was doing more than anything else. So it wasn't like the film study was going to help you in that regard. And so I think you can make the argument that's why Heupel and companies should hold their spring game and even televise it, because that's kind of a big deal. David Speak says, sounds like David and we are having debates here, because you go, sorry, Caleb, I think the annual spring game helps morale for each upcoming season. Well, I mean, but if that's the case, hold it and have the fans go. I mean, I don't think watching it on TV helps the morale, David. I'm going to be honest with you. I think televising the spring games is just a way for the SEC network to fill time slots during those days, because during the spring and during March, it becomes harder and harder to think of stuff to do, and that allows them to ration some of their time slots they need to fill. So I don't think it's as easy of a scenario as you're thinking. I mean, it's tough, man. I could tell you, as someone who actually just reports on college football, finding topics to talk about can be very, very tough at different times. I just, particularly in the heart of the March, I know it's March Madness, but there's only so much feature stuff you can do. So that's what makes, and particularly most spring games happen after March Madness ends. So we're talking mid-April. Man, it gets hard to find that period between the end of March Madness and the NFL draft. That gets tough. And you got to really work to find something. So that's all I would say with that. Portions of the program are brought to you by Chattanooga Mortgage. Congratulations, your home search just got easier. Buying a home in Chattanooga has never been easier. Chat with 2Ts mortgage.com. Chat with 2Ts mortgage.com. All right. Bank on it right now. I might have to change my thoughts on one player. Bank on it. Brought to you by Commercial Bank, member FDIC, life made better. Deshaun Bishop may actually be an elite back for Tennessee. That's right. Now, I have said for a while that Deshaun Bishop, I think, is a solid back. I respect him. I respect everything that he brings to the table as a football player, but I also feel like he's a little too small to remain a feature back in this league. I felt like he had trouble picking up pass protection last year, and not in the Dylan Sampson way of just having trouble trying to figure things out and where to block in 2023 when I criticized Sampson. I felt like Deshaun Bishop was just not strong enough at 5'10", 200 pounds. However, apparently, not everybody sees eye to eye with me on that. And at the NFL Combine, Brew McCoy, of all people, made a statement that is making me kind of question my belief system on that. McCoy said straight up, he was asked at the Combine about a Tennessee player to watch in 2025. And he said Mike Matthews, Nico, but then he said, quote, but one guy to look out for is Deshaun Bishop. He's a stud, local guy, extremely hard worker. I spent a lot of time in the gym with him, and he's got a ton of talent. Now, Deshaun Bishop last year backed up Dylan Sampson, who was really just a sole back. Without Peyton Lewis, though, the reason I was hesitant on Deshaun Bishop is it wasn't like they did a two-back system. They made Dylan Sampson the feature back, and Deshaun Bishop was clearly number 2. But as the number 2 back, I never thought about this, but he did average over 6 yards a carry. He had 74 carries for 455 yards, 3 touchdowns. He had a 10-yard catch at the same time. And, you know, there is a debate that maybe if he puts on weight but maintains his speed, he could be an elite feature back, and work ethic matters. Peyton Lewis was behind Bishop at 64 carries for 339 yards and 3 touchdowns. But again, Peyton Lewis was battling an injury at the beginning of the year. I think Peyton Lewis is a uniquely skilled player, and I think Peyton Lewis is going to turn into an incredibly talented player for Tennessee. But as of right now, look, let's call it what it is. Deshaun Bishop was more productive. I've been cold on Deshaun Bishop ever since we were previewing the running backs for spring ball, because I just didn't think, again, he would ever be able to get to the level to do all the necessary things as a feature back. But Brew McCoy's making me wonder if I should change my mind. Bank on it. Is Deshaun Bishop a future elite star? He may have the potential to be so. Bank on it. Brought to you by Commercial Bank.
Commercial Bank is your neighborhood bank. What makes us different from other banks? We understand that every customer has unique opportunities, challenges, and financial concerns. We don't expect you to fit into the same box as the next person or business. Whether it's purchasing a home, saving for your child's future, or planning for your next vacation, we're with you every step of the way to navigate life's big decisions.
All right, that's right. That was Bank on It. Member FDIC, brought to you by Commercial Bank. Bank on It, brought to you by Commercial Bank, member FDIC. The segment of the show is not an FDIC member. It's not a bank. Anyways, what do you guys think? Is Deshaun Bishop an underrated running back who could be a star in this system? I think it's very possible. I do. And I wouldn't have said that a while ago, but I'm starting to think that Deshaun Bishop could very possibly be a star running back for Tennessee based on what Brew McCoy said. I'll say this about Brew McCoy. All due respect to him, given his injuries, he was a disappointment last year. Again, it's because he was injured. He was dealing with a problem that wasn't his fault. He was coming back from an injury, so he wasn't able to dictate the coverage the way he was needed to. At the same time, there's nothing about Brew McCoy's past that suggests he's ever been a liar. And as a matter of fact, he's been a heck of a leader and involved with a lot of the offensive players over the years. So I think when he talks about Tennessee's football players, I listen. There's no hidden agenda about this. Hearing what he said about Deshaun Bishop, I got to be honest with you. I'm not so sure that I need to that I don't need to rethink what I've been thinking about Deshaun Bishop. And if that's the case, where does Tennessee's running back combination go from that point? Because do they go Peyton Lewis and Dylan Sampson, which is highly possible. Don't get me wrong. They could go Peyton Lewis, Dylan Sampson. They could also go Peyton Lewis and one of the new running backs that are coming in. They got a bunch of new freshmen coming in. There's not a ton of depth at the position of experienced players. So Lewis and Bishop would be the only proven experienced players at this point. And look, there's a legitimate argument that with that in mind, Deshaun Bishop becomes, if he actually improves as a back and he's able to put on the size that we're talking about that is necessary to be able to compete in the SEC and not just be a change of pace back, then we might be talking more about Tennessee with a by committee system last year. Maybe the only reason Dylan Sampson was setting all the records last year is because Tennessee literally wasn't in a position to play by committee basketball. I'm sorry, by committee football. Listen to myself. To play by committee football, given the fact that they were so banged up at the running back spot. I mean, these are all thoughts, and it's kind of intriguing. You guys can tell me. There are other players in the system. David says Star Thomas is a veteran. You are right, but I'm talking about returning experienced players. And Star Thomas obviously transferred from Duke. There are some interesting thoughts on this. Warrior Angel says maybe let kids catch passes from the current quarterback with wide receiver catch. Oh, you guys are talking about the spring game stuff. I'll get to that poll question in a minute. I'm gonna look back on it. David says that he's been on Bishop as an impact player since he flipped from Coastal Carolina. He's a faster Jabari Small. He is, but he's not a pass blocker the way Jabari Small is. Deshaun Bishop's issue since he's been at Tennessee is he's just not big enough to pass block. Now, let me just say this about Deshaun Bishop, because technically Dylan Sampson was only slightly heavier than Bishop, but he just seemed like he was stronger. If Bishop can add 10 pounds and maintain the athleticism he's had, we're talking about a guy of Dylan Sampson's caliber at that point. And that's crazy to think about, but we are. I mean, the issue with him is I haven't seen Bishop be able to do that. David says he sees Bishop and Lewis and Thomas as a three-headed monster. I certainly see that as a possibility. I mean, all three of them could be elite. So, we're going to have to see how that goes. But it's definitely a good start for Bishop. It's definitely a good sign for Bishop that Brew McCoy is touting him. Brew McCoy is not somebody to lie. And I think Brew McCoy, having worked with Bishop, maybe it could be a friendship thing. Maybe they worked out together, so Brew McCoy's biased, but it could also be a Brew McCoy was a leader of this team and scouted talent well. And if that's the case, I might be eating a little bit of crow on Deshaun Bishop when all is said and done, because that might end up being proven that Deshaun Bishop is more of an elite player than I thought. He certainly showed flashes last year. As a runner, he's there. As a runner, Deshaun Bishop is there. I got no issues with Deshaun Bishop as a runner. The question for Deshaun Bishop comes down to whether or not he can pass block the way we need him, the way Tennessee needs him to pass block, the way I would need him to pass block if I'm going to be high on him as an all-around feature back, because I just haven't seen that yet. And again, it wasn't not picking up blitz as well. He picked them up. He just didn't seem strong enough or big enough to maintain blocks when that happened. So it's an intriguing debate. We'll see where things land up, but I do think it's kind of interesting how that's all going to play out. Portions of the program are brought to you by the Hemp House, the premier hemp dispensary online with a wide variety, great selection, and strict standards. Hemp House Chat with 2Ts.com. Hemp House Chat with 2Ts.com. Use the promo code HOOKED for 10% off. HOOKED for 10% off. Back to the poll question real quick. What should Tennessee football do with its spring game? 83% say keep it and televise it. 17% say cancel it. 0% say keep it, but don't televise it. So it looks like I'm literally the only person who thinks that, and I don't have a vote on this. So that is kind of intriguing how that all works out. Before we get rolling, let's get to this day in Tennessee basketball, this day in Tennessee Vols history, brought to you by Hound Dogs of Knoxville. Champions look good in orange. hdknoxville.com, hdknoxville.com. On this day in Tennessee history, Tennessee basketball closed out its first regular season under Bruce Pearl. We're talking about March 4th, 2006. They beat the Vanderbilt Commodores 68-59. Vanderbilt had actually built a pretty solid lead. If I'm not mistaken, Vanderbilt actually went up by 16 points in that game at one point, and Tennessee had to fight back. They had to come back, claw back to win. This was a Tennessee basketball team that was a very exciting team. It was Bruce Pearl's first team. They had gotten into the top 10, but they really hit a wall and got tired down the stretch and were working their way out of the top 25. And they were just tired towards the end of the regular season. But going to Vanderbilt on the road, they had a little bit more left in the tank, and they used what little they had left in the tank to come back, to lead a big comeback, to beat the Commodores 68-59. That capped off the regular season of Bruce Pearl's Bruce Pearl's first regular season, where he revitalized the basketball program after 4 miserable years of Buzz Peterson. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Tennessee basketball and what they need to do to get a number 1 seed, because there are still some questions about that. We're going to head to the hardwood, speaking of Bruce Pearl. So stick with us 2 minutes. We will be right back. Once again, the show brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win. Why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. Live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville. New and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. Stick with us. We'll be back 2 minutes.
It's a new year, a new day, and Ted Russell Lincoln has an exciting new offer to share. Right now, get a 2024 Lincoln Navigator with 0% APR for 72 months and up to $4,000 in bonus cash. Or drive away in a new 2024 Lincoln Corsair Grand Touring with 0% APR for 60 months and up to $4,500 in bonus cash. It's time to get excited about the ride. Come and see what a luxury car experience truly is at Ted Russell Lincoln Knoxville.
Now in its 45th year, the second and third generations continue Joe Newbert's commitment.
His vision of what this business needed to be, we still try to live up to that.
Joe Newbert Collision Center.
Having been in the jewelry industry for a long time in the Knoxville community, I saw a need for a jeweler, a real jeweler.
Our ability to do these designs has really been based on the customers bringing new things in and challenging us as a store. Our goal is not to tell anybody what they want. Our goal is to listen to what they want and then help them get there.
Schedule your consultation today to get your special someone the perfect custom gift just in time for the holidays.
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Dare to compare.
Double D Piping provides full-service fire protection on any scale. From residential homes to government facilities, we can assist any customer through design, fabrication, installation, inspection, and demonstration of fire suppression systems. With 30 years of service across 5 states and a full staff with over 40 years experience, our quality can't be beat. Don't get caught watching what you could have prevented. Call Double D Piping.
Welcome back to the program. Again, broadcasting you live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville. New and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. Dave Hooker would like to let you know that he recently got a Jeep, and you know he can be a little picky. How long was he looking for a car? He was talking about it all the time. He needed someone to walk him through the options. Andy and Nick White had him covered while he decided on just what car he was going with. There was no doubt that he was going to leave with a quality vehicle, because that's all they carry at Ted Russell Ford Lincoln on Kingston Pike and Parkside Drive. After one meeting, you'll leave knowing what you should expect for the vehicle or vehicles you want. Now it's just a matter of time and making up your mind. And you won't believe this. Nick says if you don't hear from him soon enough, call a cell. That's what I call 5-star service with no pressure. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln on Kingston Pike and Parkside Drive. If you want to stop at lot after lot and waste precious time, that's an option. But why? Ted Russell Ford Lincoln has perfected the buying process. As for Dave's Jeep, he's got plenty of time. He had plenty of time to decide. With Ted Russell Ford Lincoln, they'll have whatever vehicle you'll decide upon on their lot. After all, they're East Tennessee's #1 volume Ford dealer. Whether it's partnering with local businesses or sending someone home in their first car, Ted Russell Ford Lincoln loves to be a part of special moments in East Tennessee. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln views it as an honor to serve their friends and neighbors. That's why they're so committed to providing exceptional customer service. There's nothing better than driving off in the car of your dreams, and Ted Russell Ford Lincoln believes it's a pleasure to help people do just that every day. Do yourself a favor. If you want a fantastic vehicle at a great price and a smile on your face as you drive off the lot, stop by Ted Russell Ford Lincoln on Kingston Pike and Parkside Drive. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln, the exclusive vehicle provider and studio sponsor of Off the Hook Sports. Once again, the show represented by Banks & Jones. Tennessee's trial attorney, play to win, why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. Banks & Jones. .com. All righty. Joe Lunardi's newest bracketology is out. And after Tennessee basketball got a huge win over Alabama, they have moved up to where you want them to be, which is a #1 seed in the NCAA Tournament. They're not the only ones. Joe Lunardi's not the only one to push Tennessee basketball up to a #1 seed in the NCAA Tournament. Jerry Palm's bracketology also has the Vols as a #1 seed in the NCAA Tournament. So things are looking up for Tennessee with this bracketology ranking. Now, here's the problem. It's not across the board with the bracketology rankings. And this is going to be a little concerning and upsetting to some Tennessee fans. But I'm just giving you the data points. College Sports Madness, as of their March 3rd bracket, still had Tennessee as a #2 seed. The Fox Sports bracket, which came out yesterday, had Tennessee as a #2 seed as well. Right now, the 1 seeds come down to 6 different teams: Auburn, Duke, Alabama, Houston, Tennessee, and Florida. College Sports Madness had Duke in Tennessee's place. College Sports Madness had Auburn, Duke, Florida, and Houston. The Fox had Auburn, Duke, Alabama, and Houston. Now, what's the proper way to look at this? Who is in the best position for the #2 seed? Well, after Tennessee's win over Alabama, you may not be excited about where this is going. Don't get too excited about Joe Lunardi's bracket or Jerry Palm's bracket. And here's why. The path to the #1 seed is way tougher than it looks if you go by the metrics that they use. So we've just told you Tennessee is they're a #1 seed in half of them and a #2 seed in half the bracketologies. What about the metrics that are used to rank teams? Well, Tennessee's net ranking right now is #5, behind Auburn, Duke, Houston, and Florida. It's assumed that Auburn, Duke, and Houston are going to be #1 seeds. That's kind of a given. Auburn, Duke, Houston are the top 3 in the ESPN BPI. They're top 3 in the NCAA net rankings. And in the AP poll, they're the top 3 teams in the AP poll as of right now. So, and the coaches poll. So as of right now, those seem like the 3 locked in teams. By every metric, those are the top 3 teams. The 4th #1 seed really comes down to Tennessee, Florida, and potentially Alabama. Now, Tennessee is 1 spot ahead of Alabama in the net rankings. They're 1 spot ahead of Alabama in the BPI. They're 4th in the BPI, which is good news for them. They're 3rd in the RPI, 1 spot behind Alabama. Again, very good news for them to be that high in the RPI. Here's the problem. Alabama and Florida play this week. Tennessee plays Ole Miss and South Carolina to close out the season. if Tennessee's going to get the fourth number one seed, they have to stay ahead of Alabama and Florida. That's not as easy as it looks, because here's the truth of the matter. If Alabama beats Florida, which, again, they very well could. That game is on Wednesday on ESPN2. They play them at home. I think they're going to be favored. That quality win is going to push them ahead of Tennessee in the net rankings. And it may actually not drop Florida below Tennessee in the net rankings, which would push Tennessee to 6th. And the net rankings are the formula that are used the most by the selection committee for the number one seeds. On top of that, Alabama is going to maintain and actually increase their lead ahead of the Vols in the RPI. They also could jump Tennessee in the BPI if that happens. Now, I know what you guys are going to say. Well, Tennessee just beat Alabama. Yeah, but road versus home matters, particularly in the net rankings. And what they're going to look at, and what the committee could look at, is that Tennessee needed a last-second 3 to beat Alabama at home. It's not crazy when you take all this into account that Alabama ends up getting the number one seed, even if Tennessee wins out, because winning out means winning at Ole Miss. Not a bad win, don't get me wrong, but not some blow-you-away win, okay? And then beating South Carolina at home. South Carolina is the worst team in the SEC this year. So Tennessee's path to a number one seed is a lot more difficult than you might think, because I do believe the winner of the Florida-Alabama game is going to bump Tennessee. They split the series with Florida. Their win over Alabama was a last-second shot at home. The really only way, if you're Tennessee, to hope to maintain a spot ahead of them is if Alabama beats Florida and then loses to Auburn on Saturday. But that's at Auburn. It's really hard to see if Alabama split that, if they would stay behind Tennessee in the net rankings. This is real difficult. And I've told you guys, I don't believe the selection committee prioritizes the conference tournament whatsoever. But I honestly think that this year, that's going to be how they determine the other number one seed, the other 1 or 2 1 seeds from the SEC. That's what makes this extremely difficult for them. I want to talk about this a little more in a second. First, the show brought to you by Double D Piping.
Double D Piping provides full-service fire protection on any scale. From residential homes to government facilities, we can assist any customer through design, fabrication, installation, inspection, and demonstration of fire suppression systems. With 30 years of service across 5 states and a full staff with over 40 years experience, our quality can't be beaten. Don't get caught watching what you could have prevented. Call Double D Piping.
Sticking to the comments on whether or not Tennessee basketball should be a number 1 or number 2 seed. Travis says Tennessee would be a number 2 seed if they were undefeated. It's ridiculous. Travis, I mean, look, I can't look. Can you look at a year in Tennessee history where they should have been a number 1 seed? I mean, even this year, I just went down with the net rankings. It's very close. It's 5 to they're in the 4 to 6 range across all rankings. Yes, they're third in the RPI, but the RPI has been demoted significantly below the net rankings and the BPI for what seeding you should be. Tennessee's a number 4 seed in the BPI and a number 5 seed in the net rankings. What I'm talking about is what's projected to happen going forward, because it's hard to see Tennessee staying ahead of Florida and Alabama or Alabama in either of these situations. And to get the number 1 seed, they'll have to stay ahead of both, because I'm sorry, but I think the winner of that game between Florida and Alabama tomorrow is going to be the one that pushes ahead of Tennessee. And I don't even think it matters if Alabama loses to Auburn on Saturday. That's a road loss to the number 1 team in the nation by all metrics. So with that in mind, I don't think Tennessee's path to a number 1 seed is as clear cut even with this win as it usually is. Guys, I know I'm 180ing myself from this past weekend when we had Will West on, when we talked about, when I said I thought Tennessee it wouldn't matter the conference tournament if they won out. They'd be a lock for number 1 seed. I was wrong. I looked at how things played out. I looked at how the net rankings played out. The net rankings and the effects that were had based on that win that Tennessee had over Alabama were not as substantial as I thought they would be. So Tennessee does not have enough breathing room. And beating Ole Miss and South Carolina just won't be enough to help them this week. And you really don't want Alabama to lose to Florida and beat Auburn, by the way, which is a very possible team, because then Alabama and Florida both move ahead of Tennessee. If Florida beats Alabama and then Alabama beats Auburn, or if Alabama beats Florida and Auburn, actually that's a more clear-cut way, then Alabama, Houston, Duke, and Auburn would stay ahead of Tennessee. Now, we're just talking SEC for a minute. Talking about Duke, I mean, they do visit North Carolina, which is a possible loss. They visit them March 8th. So that'll be their final game of the year. Houston, on the other hand, playing in the Big 12, visits Baylor at the end of the year. Again, those are both, Duke and Houston are both visiting solid teams on the road. More to lose than gain. If either of them loses those games, then you could maybe then see Tennessee moving ahead of one of them. And then that's another path. But in just terms of the SEC, it's hard to see Tennessee staying ahead of Alabama and Florida, which looks like it could be necessary if Tennessee is going to do what it needs to do to get a number 1 seed. Now, Tennessee versus Houston in the net rankings, Tennessee is 10-5 in quadrant 1 games. Houston's 8-4. Tennessee's 4-0 in quadrant 2. Houston's 9-0. So in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, Tennessee's 14-5. Houston is 17-4. I mean, sorry, end of the day, that's a better record. And they both are undefeated in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4 games. To be fair, they're undefeated in quadrant 2, 3, and 4 games. But 17-4 versus 14-5 and quadrant 1 and 2 games. I get Tennessee's played a much tougher schedule with more quadrant 1 games, so it's tougher to decipher all of this. But 15 plus 4 is 19, 12 plus 9. Overall, Tennessee's, you could say that the schedule strength is not as clear-cut as you might think, because quadrant 2 versus quadrant 1, but then there's quadrant 3 versus quadrant 4. And Tennessee has actually, while they played more quadrant 1 games, Houston's played more quadrant 1 and 2 games, and those do count together. So that's kind of an interesting thought. So again, if Houston does end up losing over the weekend, or if Duke ends up losing, then we're talking about a different story, because when you talk Tennessee versus Duke, Tennessee's 10-5 in quadrant 1 games. Duke is 6-3. Duke's 6-0 in quadrant 2. Tennessee's 4-0. It's a little bit difficult to see how Duke is so high in the net rankings. I'm not exactly sure how the formula works on that, but if Duke does lose to UNC over the weekend, I do think they would drop too. So UNC and Baylor could help Tennessee. Florida, Alabama, that's going to be tricky. The point of the matter is there is a difficult path for Tennessee to maintain their number 1 seed that is projected by a few people now, not many. Portions of the program are brought to you by Joe Newberg Collision Center. For nearly 50 years, Newberg Collision Center has been East Tennessee's best choice for quality repair work and fantastic customer service. JoeNewbergCollision.com. Sticking with seeding, it's time to go to the other side of basketball, and I'm obviously talking about women's basketball. We talked yesterday about Tennessee hitting a wall as they lost a tough one to the Georgia Bulldogs. That was not a game they wanted to lose, and it was certainly a bad look. Georgia was a really bad team, not yesterday, on Sunday, and with that loss, Tennessee suffered a significant drop. The blowout loss to Kentucky was one thing. Losing to Georgia was way, 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 way worse, okay? So now Tennessee is in a bit of a bind because the SEC tournament for women's basketball starts this week. Now, the SEC tournament, interestingly enough, I still maintain that it's not taken into account as much, but I also maintain this: seeding matters more in women's college basketball than men's. Why? You really want that home game in women's college basketball. That's the difficult part. You really, really, really want the home game in women's college basketball. And Tennessee, by nature of being Tennessee, they could potentially get a home game in the NCAA tournament. But looking at the bracketology, and just for those who don't know, Tennessee is going to play Texas A&M on Wednesday, I believe it is. That's their first SEC tournament game. Is Tennessee will play Texas A&M on Wednesday, and then the winner of that game will play Vanderbilt on Thursday. But going through this real quick, looking at the bracketology for Jerry Palm, I'm sorry, not Jerry Palm, listen to me, Charlie Cream, that's what I'm trying to talk about. Tennessee has now dropped to a 5 seed. Why is that significant? In the women's NCAA tournament, the top 4 seeds in each bracket get to play the first weekend at home. Losing to Georgia has now knocked Tennessee out of that path. So Tennessee's path looks like it'll have to be through the SEC tournament to get a home game. The same, now a top 4 seed would mean to be in the top 16 of the national rankings. Tennessee's number 18 in the AP poll. They're number 22 in the RPI. The good news is they're still number 14 in the net rankings, and they go heavily by the net rankings. By going heavily by the net rankings, and by virtue of being the Tennessee brand, they still have a 50-50 shot, I would say, of being a 4 seed to host the first weekend of the tournament, no matter what is said about, no matter what anybody's saying about the on the bracketology and where they belong. But I think they're going to have to win 2 games in the SEC tournament. I think they're going to have to win 2 games. They're going to have to beat Texas A&M. They can't lose to Texas A&M, and then they're going to have to beat Vanderbilt if they're going to go. Now, if they win those 2 games, they do play South Carolina on Friday. South Carolina will boost their RPI and their net rankings overall, win or lose. It'll help their schedule strength, whereas they will have added 2 wins to their schedule to their record. On top of that, they got to put up a fight against South Carolina. I don't know if they can. They're already hitting a wall. They look dead tired. And that was a problem with this team. The depth is still not where it needs to be. It's now, we say that nobody's playing more than 25 minutes a game, which is the goal. But Kim Caldwell wants 10 people playing 20 minutes. And some of them are just not cut out for the system to be able to do that. So somebody like Jillian Hollingshead, who has to play more minutes, she wasn't recruited to play in this system. And I do think there's a ceiling for her in this system. So the goal for the Lady Vols is obviously going to be to host an NCAA tournament game. I'm sorry, the first weekend in the NCAA tournament. It's difficult to see if they're going to be able to do that, given the hand that they dealt themselves by losing to Georgia. That was a really, really, really big deal. We'll talk about this more in a second. First, we are broadcasting to you live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville, new and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer.
Like a blast from the past, the Super Dealer is back. Look to the skies, Knoxville. The Super Dealer is fighting for price, service, and the American-made. Ted Russell Ford is your Super Dealer, just in time for Truck Month. Save up to $5,350 on this new Ford F-150 XLT Hybrid, or save up to $7,000 on this new Ford Expedition. Come see the Super Dealer today at either Ted Russell Ford.
Welcome back to the program, talking about the Lady Vols and their path to get a home playoff game. Ideally, they would want to win 3 games in this tournament. Do you guys think they have a shot at beating South Carolina? Now, South Carolina notoriously underperforms sometimes in the SEC tournament. In case you guys forgot, last year before Kelly Harper was fired, Tennessee actually had South Carolina beat and then left the player wide open for a game-winning 3 to lose that game. That could have changed the complexion and dynamics of everything with the program and Kelly Harper coaching the team. That was a rough game for her. That was a rough game for the Lady Vols, and probably all in all led to her firing. Do you think this time around Tennessee can get them? Maybe, but can they get past Texas A&M and Vanderbilt first? I mean, I don't know. They're higher ranked than both teams. Even though Vanderbilt's the higher seed, Tennessee's going to be favored over Vanderbilt if they face off in that second round game on Thursday. They first have to get through the first round game, though. Again, we don't know how this is going to play out. Now, here's the problem with trying to beat South Carolina. The tournament's being held in Greenville in South Carolina. Pretty sure the Gamecocks are going to have more home fans than anybody else. So I think that's going to be totally difficult for them. But at the same time, I just think it's way too difficult of a process for the Lady Vols to host an NCAA tournament game. And that loss to Georgia is going to end up being a killer. I mean, it's going to end up being a killer. The biggest thing they can bank on at this point is the Lady Vol brand name, which is a great brand. There is nothing wrong with that brand. Everything with it is worthy of praising, but it's going to be tough. Now, David Speaks says the Lady Vols are an 8th seed. They're 9th seed in the SEC tournament, but they could actually end up being a 4 or 5 seed overall in the NCAA tournament. It's between 4 or 5. They won't be any lower than a 6th, put it that way. And so that's kind of where we are. I'm going to set that up as the poll question. Here we go. We'll set this up. What's more likely? And this is actually an intriguing one since we're talking about both of them. What's more likely? Men's Vols get a number 1 seed. Lady Vols host the first weekend. in the NCAA tournament. What's more likely in the NCAA tournament? Men's Vols get a number 1 seed. Lady Vols host the first weekend. All right, so you guys vote on that because I'm kind of interested where y'all land. Both seem like a bit of an uphill climb. Right now, the men's side being a number 1 seed would seem more likely, but that's not taking into account things that are going to play out the rest of the week. And it's also not taking into account politicking, because who's more likely to get the fairer draw from national media and national people affiliated with the sport and the selection committee? It's the Lady Vols. They're a giant brand. Everybody wants to see them be successful. So when you take that into account, it's really hard to say that the Lady Vols aren't going to be the ones with the advantage on that. Daniel Maddox, nice one. Maybe Harper and Oates should discuss late game strategy. I mean, you were right. That Kelly Harper defense was awful. I think the Nate Oates coaching at the end of this past game was even worse. Honestly, I think we're going to have to say that was even worse. That was just an absolute embarrassment. I've never seen something so bad in my life, and taking that into account, it's a little intriguing how bad that was. So you got me there. Portions of the program are brought to you by Quality Tire Pros, serving Chattanooga community since 1957. All major brands of tires, full service automotive, brake alignments, oil changes, and more. QualityTirePros.com. Walk in and say, "Hey, Bo, Off the Hook sent you." QualityTirePros.com. When we come back, we're going to talk about some college football politicking now. And we'll also have our stat of the day. Stick with us. 2 minutes. We will be right back.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com. Dave Hooker here for Dynasty Pools and Spas, your home for the best spas and everything you need to jump right in. Relaxing? Therapeutic? Absolutely. But what sets Dynasty Pools and Spas apart from others is that you get everything with any spa purchase. You get the cover lift, the steps, delivery, and chemicals. When Dynasty Pools and Spas delivers your spa from their Athens location within 125 miles, you'll get your own personal hydrotherapy spa. Mention me, Dave Hooker, or Off the Hook Sports, and get $500 off your top quality new spa. Dynasty Pools and Spas, just off the Athens exit. Drop in and receive a free gift from Off the Hook Sports, Dynasty Pools and Spas. Mention Off the Hook Sports for a drop-in prize and that $500 discount. Dynasty Pools and Spas. To check out some of the Dynasty Spa models and to buy spa chemicals, go to dynastypoolsandspas.com. Dynasty Pools and Spas.
Now in its 45th year, the second and third generations continue Joe Newbert's commitment.
His vision of what this business needed to be, we still try to live up to that.
Joe Newbert Collision Center.
Are you ready to get strong? At NFC, we offer top-notch weight training and functional fitness, so you can build strength and improve your performance. Join today at NFC1.com or stop by any one of our 7.
Welcome back to the program. With Off the Hook Sports, I'm Caleb Calhoun. Dave is out with a sinus infection today. Portions of the program brought to you by Rick Terry Jewelry Designs. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry, a Tennessee tradition. RickTerryJewelry.com. RickTerryJewelry.com. Let's dive into Greg Sankey. And Tennessee's at the heart of this, guy, so this is going to be very intriguing. Greg Sankey seems to have all of a sudden declared open war on the College Football Playoff Committee. Now, this comes on the heels of the meetings in Dallas last week where nothing came out of it. We haven't heard a report at all. We don't know if there's going to be changes to this year's College Football Playoff, if there were any discussions for the 2026 College Football Playoff. I've been on top of this for you guys. I've done my best to cover it. but we have no idea what came out of it. We also know that beyond that, the SEC leaders, and I'm talking about athletic directors and coaches and all that, athletic directors met the week before, and SEC and Big Ten had a meeting the week before. So it's been a very active 2 weeks for Greg Sankey, and we haven't heard anything about what's going on with all that. However, something came out of what he was talking about yesterday. Remember, Greg Sankey is the consummate politician. He doesn't really say a lot. But he was on the Paul Feinbaum show, and he said two things that lead me to believe that he's declaring open war on the College Football Playoff Committee as we speak. The first part is he was talked about the seating structure, and we already knew about this. We know that the SEC and the Big Ten want straight seating. Now, by the way, I want to point out the SEC and the Big Ten do not agree on everything. We're not so sure the SEC is on board with the automatic qualifiers. But I think they are, because Greg Sankey wants the 9-game schedule. That's a different debate. But he basically said, Greg Sankey was, quote, allocations have been made. What he's saying is, we've already given you smaller conferences your extra spot at the table and your extra seat at the table. That does not mean you deserve a higher seat just for being a conference champion. He has a big issue with that. More importantly, though, was Greg Sankey defended his 2 member schools that had home and homes canceled. As we know, Nebraska canceled a home and home non-conference with Tennessee last week, disappointing a lot of fans for 2026 and 2027. On top of that, Wake Forest canceled a home and home with Ole Miss that was supposed to begin in 2025. Greg Sankey came on, and while he was defending his member schools, he didn't go at Wake Forest or Nebraska ADs. As a matter of fact, he didn't even blame them. He said he doesn't blame the athletic directors for either decision. He specifically blames the College Football Playoff Committee. Here's Greg Sankey's quote. I saw a series that was disappointing from my perspective when Nebraska announced it wasn't going to play a contracted series with the University of Tennessee. I think that would have been great for college football. Early in the season, we saw Wake Forest like 2 or 3 days before the first game of a 2-game series with Ole Miss cancel that. This is not to point the finger at Nebraska's athletic director, who I have a good relationship with, but he said, quote, I talked to the CFP selection committee members, and they said they didn't think not playing the game would hurt Nebraska's opportunity for the CFP, unquote. I think we have to cope with the reality. That's not great for college football. Then he went on to say, speaking of the SEC, we had a set of 3 lost teams not in the playoff. Now, as I recall, we had 3 lost teams from the SEC ahead of some 2 lost teams from significant conferences. So I will note there was a recognition on the part of the selection on the strength of our league. We also had teams selected to participate, 3 teams, and the meaning week to week throughout the season was real. In fact, I would argue we experienced collectively the most exciting November that we could have experienced. Now, how do we make November and December even more interesting to people? I think that's something we should be speaking of. It does have an impact on our own decision making. Then he closes with, I'd like to see us play more of these high-profile games, both within the conference and outside the conference, but we have to recognize the CFP selection process is an important governing decision, making factor that contributes to the eventual outcomes, whether it's non-conference games or whether it's the number of games played within conferences. Some have made decisions within their TV negotiations to expand from 8 to 9. We've not made that at this point. It's part of what's on the agenda for the months ahead. That's talking about a 9-game schedule that he wants it. But here's what Greg Sankey is saying. Greg Sankey is saying, College Football Playoff Committee, you are screwing up everything we want to do with college football because you're not valuing schedule strength. He's declaring open war on the CFP committee as he is in the process of trying to wield his power to change the CFP format for this year. Look, we talk about how the SEC and Big Ten have flexed their muscles, how they hold all the cards, and they're just waiting to play them. It looks like the SEC started to play their cards now. It looks like Greg Sankey is playing his cards now. And I think he's got a point. The canceling of these series was a big straw for him. And he went not at blaming Nebraska or Wake Forest, which would have been politically the right move to prop up his schools, particularly since Wake Forest is in the ACC, which is not a conference he's looking out for. The Big Ten with Nebraska may be different as there's some agreements there. But he just straight up called out the CFP committee. What he's saying is they canceled those series because the CFP committee did not value schedule strength last year. You know what? He's right. They didn't. It was very obvious they didn't value schedule strength last year. They valued record. And it was an embarrassment that they valued record. And he is saying it doesn't look like there's a sign they'll do that again, that they'll change that this year. So first of all, I'm going to ask you guys in the poll question real quick. Because what's more likely in the NCAA tournament, men's Vols get a number 1 seed, is 100%. Lady Vols host the first weekend is 0%, ending that poll. But I'll just ask you, who's at fault for Nebraska and Wake Forest canceling Tennessee Ole Miss series? And then the questions are Nebraska, Wake ADs, Forest, or the CFP committee. Yeah, so here's the question. Who is at fault for Nebraska and Wake Forest canceling Tennessee and Ole Miss series? Nebraska and Wake Forest or the CFP committee? I think it's the CFP committee. I think Greg Sankey's right. Greg Sankey is absolutely right on this. Why would Nebraska play an extra game when the College Football Playoff Committee is not doing anything to value schedule strength at this point? And they showed that last year. And, I mean, it's okay, so David Speaks says not playing a good strength of schedule hurts the playoffs. Ask Boise State and Indiana. You're right, and this is the issue. It's allowing teams to get in that don't belong in. Okay, the strength of schedule was not a factor at all in last year's playoff. And I'm not even just saying with the Big Ten and other schools. Texas being as high as they were because they had one regular season loss. That was ridiculous. Texas played one good team all year in Georgia, and they lost that, and they lost to that team. So I would argue that Tennessee should have been ahead of Texas. I think you could have made an argument that Alabama should have been ahead of Texas. I'm not even lying to you. This is the thing. They have to value schedule strength a heck of a lot more than they did. And what Nebraska's looking at and what these other schools are looking at is this. Why play these games? Why play these games if you're not going to value the strength of schedule and not going to give us credit for playing these games? And Greg Sankey said something very revealing in that quote. He said, again, I'm pulling it out, but he said that Nebraska's athletic director told him that CFP committee members said not playing the game would not hurt Nebraska's opportunity for the CFP. Meaning the Nebraska athletic director was told directly, playing a big game like Tennessee in non-conference play would add no benefit to you whatsoever with the selection committee. Do you know how ridiculous that is? Think about how insane that is, guys. This is why college football is so screwed up right now. Because you have a CFP selection. One, you have a format that's absolutely bonkers and makes no sense. You have a selection committee that places no value on schedule strength whatsoever. You're incentivizing less good games. And this is why the SEC is flexing their muscles now. And I think Greg Sankey is declaring open war on the SEC for this reason. It's a big problem. You can't expect these schools to play tough schedules while at the same time not rewarding them for it. And what do you think it's going to do for the overall ratings of the sport? Okay, I'm sorry, but this is not the NFL. People want to talk about records. But, I mean, you want to talk about records and say that should matter more. But at the same time, you're ignoring the fact that this is not the NFL, okay? There's not the same level of parity. You can't just judge your record. You're not what your record says you are the way you are in the NFL. So, Greg Sankey, look, I got a lot of issues with Greg Sankey. I criticize Greg Sankey for a lot of things. I think he's handled a lot of things poorly. I give him credit for this. I give him credit for calling out what the Nebraska athletic director told him. I give Nebraska credit for being honest on this, because this isn't about hurting Tennessee or helping Tennessee or running. This is about showing up the College Football Playoff Committee, because the College Football Playoff Committee is a flat-out embarrassment. And the fact that they told Nebraska, according to Sankey, the fact that they told the Nebraska athletic director that whether or not they played that big non-conference schedule would have no bearing on their success whatsoever is a flat-out embarrassment. I'm sorry, but that's insane. That's flat-out insane. And truth be told, it's flat-out ridiculous. So with that in mind, I got to be honest with you. I really can't believe, that's serious, I really can't believe someone said that. I can't believe the College Football Playoff Selection Committee said that. And because they said that, Greg Sankey is absolutely right to declare open war on the college football playoff committee. So where does this leave us? Where does this go from here? Look, I think changes are coming to the 2025 playoff now. I thought that the other conferences might wield their power in 2026 would happen. But with this in mind, I think changes are coming to the 2025 playoff because it looks like the SEC is flexing their muscle more than they ever have before. And it looks like Greg Sankey's finally decided to flex his muscle. So that means the changes will come to 2025 and they're going to get their way for 2026. And here's the other part. This may be throwing the Big Ten under the bus too, because the changes may be coming in 2025 and Greg Sankey may work with the other conferences to force concessions from the 2026 teams. I think that's highly, highly possible at this point. So, taking that into account, look, big deal, big picture. You're probably going to get the straight seeding in the college football playoff this upcoming year. And Greg Sankey is using these games to show up the college football playoff committee. And honestly, I got to give him credit for it. I think that's right. And so far, only 6 votes, but who's at fault for Nebraska and Wake Forest canceling the Tennessee and Ole Miss series? Nebraska, Wake Forest, or the CFP committee? 67% are saying Nebraska, Wake Forest. I'm sorry, I disagree with that 67%. Guys, we need more votes. Come on, help me out. I say the CFP committee. The CFP committee has absolutely screwed this up. The CFP format has screwed it up, but the CFP committee, with the way they have taken games into account, have screwed it up even more. And it's pretty embarrassing how that's all worked out. And look, I just got to be honest with you guys. Greg Sankey he's politicking right now by doing what he just did. He is purposely trying to humiliate the college football playoff committee for what they've been doing. And I think there is a method to that madness, even if I don't think everything Greg Sankey does is right or smart or of the highest caliber or thinking about the best interest of the sport. I think in this situation, Greg Sankey knows exactly what he's doing. And I think that's kind of a wild thing to think about. So taking that into account, I think the root of this is changes are coming to college football playoff in 2025. There's going to be changes in 2025. And I think those changes could end up being radical because I think Greg Sankey is now wielding his power, wielding more power than he has ever wielded before. And that's probably not a good situation for the rest of college football. But given how the SEC went down with that, I don't think it matters. And I think the SEC doesn't like the way they are being treated in a lot of ways. So, yeah, no, I think Greg Sankey knew what he was doing when he did what he did. Portions of the program are brought to you by Work Trucks. We're all about trucks that are actually available, trucks that help you maximize your profits by having the right work vehicle. Now, time is money. The perfect work vehicle doesn't break down and has all the space to carry what you need. That's what Work Trucks is intent on offering, while other dealerships just can't do it. Contracting is about time. Work Trucks saves you time with less back and forth trips and trucks that pass the highest standards to be put to work. The process is also quick and easy when choosing a vehicle for Work Trucks. Cargo vans, utility body trucks with the nap hide work bodies installed, pickup trucks of all sizes, and anything special like cranes or dump trucks. Work Trucks supplies vehicles to people just like you and get you back on the road tomorrow. No dealership runaround. If you're a contractor, you need to know Work Trucks, and that's a fact. Service industry, remember Work Trucks. Work Trucks carries the trucks that your business has to have. You need Work Trucks. Clinton Highway in Knoxville and in downtown Birmingham. For the entire inventory, go online to worktrucksllc.com. worktrucksllc.com with an X. Why risk chancing your future and business on the wrong piece of equipment that burns your time? worktrucksllc.com. Work Trucks will also make sure you have the perfect vehicle you have to have. They'll even find a perfect truck, outfit it, and make sure it fits your needs to a T. Work Trucks with an X. LLC.com. WorkTrucksLLC.com. Proud supporters of the Tennessee Vols. It is time for the stat of the day, which is brought to you by the UPS Store Hardin Valley, helping individuals and small businesses, wide range of products and services, locally owned and operated. The UPS Store, 10629 Hardin Valley Road, 10629 Hardin Valley Road. The stat of the day is this. Rick Barnes-led Tennessee teams, after their win over Alabama, now have a 9-1 record at home against AP top 10 teams, including a perfect 8-0 record since March the 2nd, 2019. Yes, He's led them to a perfect 8-0 record at home against AP top 6 opponents during his 10-year tenure on Rocky Top. That's insane. That's insane. To be 8-0 since March the 2nd, 2019 against AP top 10 squads, and to be 8-0 total against top 6 teams at home during his tenure. Rick Barnes has Tennessee getting quality win after quality win after quality win, man. And he's turned Thompson Bowling Arena into a hard place to win. It seems like Kentucky's the only one that can do it nowadays, but that is Kentucky. But give Rick Barnes credit. This dude is a heck of a coach, and this was a great hire by Dave Hart 10 years ago when he landed Rick Barnes. When we come back, we're going to talk about the SEC. We're going to talk about the ACC. And we're going to talk about some interesting movement in the ACC and a settlement with Florida State and Clemson, and whether or not that means Florida State and Clemson could be joining the SEC soon. Stick with us, 2 minutes.
Like a blast from the past, the Super Dealer is back. Look to the skies, Knoxville. The Super Dealer is fighting for price, service, and the American-made. Ted Russell Ford is your Super Dealer, just in time for Truck Month. Save up to $5,350 on this new Ford F-150 XLT Hybrid, or save up to $7,000 on this new Ford Expedition. Come see the Super Dealer today at either Ted Russell Ford location, Parkside Drive, or Kingston Pike.
Sports Treasures in North Knoxville is one of the South's largest sports cards and memorabilia dealers, featuring over 10 million sports cards from vintage to modern. Sports Treasures carries a full line of hobby boxes, singles, autographed memorabilia, Tennessee Vol collectibles, fan cave decorations, and so much more. See a museum full of collectibles at Sports Treasures, 4819 North Broadway in Fountain City, and Sports Treasures on Facebook. Sports Treasures, where the real sports fan goes to shop.
Community banking is about location and much more. It's about family. We reside in your community. We are a part of your community. At Commercial Bank, our commitment extends beyond the walls of our branches. It's displayed each day in the opportunities we provide, the money we give back, and the time we commit, all to help improve the lives of the people, families, and businesses that make our communities great. Commercial Bank, life made better.
Double D Piping provides full-service fire protection on any scale. From residential homes to government facilities, we can assist any customer through design, fabrication, installation, inspection, and demonstration of fire suppression systems. With 30 years of service across 5 states and a full staff with over 40 years experience, our quality can't be beat. Don't get caught watching what you could have prevented. Call Double D Piping.
Welcome back to All of the Hook Sports. I'm Caleb Calhoun. Dave Hooker out with a sinus infection today. The show brought to you by Banks & Jones. The show represented by Banks & Jones. Tennessee's trial attorney, play to win, why settle. Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. We're live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville, new and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. Let's keep rolling with the newest news, which is that it looks like Florida State and Clemson are expected to settle with the ACC. There's a report that came from Pete Thamel on ESPN yesterday and then carried through On 3 and to a lot of other different outlets. And I have a lot to say about this. So let me guys give you a quick history lesson on how this all went down. Florida State and Clemson are primary revenue generators of the ACC. They signed an agreement with the rest of the league with the ACC in 2016. A TV deal that goes all the way through 2036. The payouts are significantly less now than the payouts for the SEC teams and the SEC as a league. And many of the ACC teams are in the same league as the SEC. Clemson are in the same state. Clemson's in the same state as South Carolina. Florida State and Miami are in the same state as Florida. The gap in payouts is so significant that it gets to a level where Clemson can never compete with South Carolina. Florida State and Miami can never compete with Florida. So they want to get out of the ACC. They would love to join the SEC, maybe even the Big Ten. And they would love to have worked out some sort of agreement where the Big Ten or SEC could help pay their exit fees or they pay it. It just seems like a valuable deal. The problem in all that is that the ACC holds the grant of rights, which would say that even if Florida State and Clemson paid an exit fee and left, like Maryland did with the ACC in 2011, the ACC controls all the media rights to those schools, even if they leave, and the ACC controls those media rights all the way through 2036, and they would need to get a majority of schools to vote against it to kill it. They could not get a majority of schools, which effectively meant they were stuck in the ACC. So they went and sued the ACC. They said that they were coerced into the back contracts in 2016. I never felt that for a while. I mean, I don't know how you could say that you were coerced or tricked. You're not like some small, poor kid signing a contract with a big-time talent agency or record agency or something like that. You were a major school, a major university with a lot of smart people. You could, like, the idea that you were tricked into the contract, I didn't buy. However, the ACC now is willing to settle. Here's what the settlement is. There's a sticking point in the exit fee between $100 and $200 million. We don't know which one it is. There's also an undisclosed number allowed to get out of the grant of rights. Now, this is the big deal. Now the schools can pay to get out of the grant of rights agreement. What that means is that there's a path, if the SEC wants them, for Clemson and Florida State to join the SEC. By those two schools, and that's if the SEC sees value in them. And think about it this way. If the SEC could renegotiate their TV deal with ESPN and make it hinge on them adding Florida State and Clemson, they get more money. They could work with Florida State and Clemson, and the three could come together for them to pay Florida State and Clemson's a portion of their grant of rights exit fee and then their conference exit fee, whatever that may be. It becomes easier in 2031 when the grant of rights, when the exit fee price collapses. Now, the SEC is stuck in their deal through 2034, but the Big Ten gets to re-up their negotiations in 2031 with their TV deal. So the Big Ten will have a lot of money. So they'll be able to swoop down and go for some ACC schools and maybe pay some grant of rights agreements. The SEC will probably feel pressure to do it just to keep up. Essentially, there will be a lot more cards held by Florida State, Clemson, and any other ACC primary schools. So the simple truth, all of that boils down to is this: with this settlement, there is now a path for them to leave the ACC and potentially join the SEC, Florida State and Clemson, by 2031. I'm going to tell you, don't bank on that happening. Not that it won't happen, but Florida State and Clemson may be a little bit too bullish on their chances and not bullish enough on other schools' chances. Let me explain. Part of this agreement and why the Florida State and Clemson settled is what we're calling a brand initiative. So 40% of the ACC revenue is going to be split evenly between all the schools. 60% is what's called a brand initiative. And what that is the schools that bring in the most TV revenue will get more money. So 60% of the TV revenue will be divided based on the ratings you draw that year in the ACC, whatever it is. That's how they're going to do it, which means more money for Florida State and Clemson. That's what they wanted. That's what they needed. Here's the problem. Florida State and Clemson are banking on them being the best draw in the ACC in the future. And they may not be. Because just this past year, not previous years, just this past year alone, want to know who the biggest draw in the ACC for TV ratings was? Want to know who would have gotten the most money in the brand distribution, in the brand initiative? Georgia Tech. That's right. Georgia Tech would be bringing in more money than Florida State and Clemson. How can Florida State and Clemson sell themselves to the SEC when Georgia Tech's bringing in more bringing in better ratings than them? I'm not done. Want to know who brought in more money to the ACC overall? SMU. Who also was a big ratings draw and could only be growing, by the way, after going to the college football playoff this past year. Let's go beyond Georgia Tech and SMU. What about North Carolina? North Carolina just hired Bill Belichick. North Carolina, until today, was going to be featured on Hard Knocks. That fell through. North Carolina is going to have everybody following them for the next few years. You don't think they're going to be a bigger TV draw than Florida State and Clemson? With Bill Belichick at the helm? What if Bill Belichick has success and builds a powerhouse program there? Here comes the issue. What if the SEC prefers North Carolina to Florida State or Clemson? North Carolina is a new market. Florida State and Clemson are in markets they're already in. If North Carolina is also drawing TV ratings, that's a huge one, plus it's extra basketball. If they do go for North Carolina, they have to go for Duke because North Carolina and Duke are tied to the hip. I think the SEC would be fine with that. What about Virginia? Virginia is a new market. What you may not know is that the University of Virginia, along with Louisville, even though Louisville's in a market the SEC is in, actually are two of the schools that joined Florida State and Clemson in generating SEC-level revenue. So Virginia does revenue numbers that Florida State and Clemson do, and the SEC could go grab them and be in a new market. They could reach the DC market at that point. What about Virginia Tech? Virginia Tech is actually a program on the rise under Brent Pry. Many people believe that they could actually be, when they're at their peak during the Frank Beamer years, they're like an ACC program. I'm sorry, an SEC program. Blacksburg gets you into the Virginia market and also an SEC cultural town. What about Miami? Miami was a bigger draw last year than Florida State. All these schools I just named could be bigger draws than Florida State and Clemson. And here's what we're not taking into account. How do we know Florida State and Clemson don't become worse draws in the future? Florida State just went 1-11 last year under Mike Norvell. They could be a program drastically on the decline. If that keeps happening, even as they're doing stadium renovations down there, Florida State may completely fall off the map. Clemson did make the college football playoff with an upset in the ACC title, but they are getting less and less relevant under Dabo Swinney by the year. As Tennessee's emerged and other schools emerge, they haven't been able to have the monopoly they once did. They were a flash in the pan 5-year program. It's starting to look more and more like in, Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence in that era, and it looks like that they're not able to maintain that. They could be falling off the map. Taking those things into account, by the time the SEC is ready to poach the ACC, which will inevitably happen, there could be other schools that are a better draw to the SEC. Let's play hot or cold and see which schools would be better of a draw than Florida State and Clemson to the SEC in 7 years. Hot or cold, brought to you by City Heat and Air Conditioning, 50 years in East Tennessee. Integrity matters. City Heating and Air, cityheatandair.com. Let's play hot or cold.
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Welcome back to the program. Hot or cold, which schools would the SEC possibly consider over Florida State and Clemson by 2031? Let's get rolling. Let's start with Miami. I'm cold on Miami versus Florida State and Clemson. It's not like Miami brings a new market. I know Florida State and Clemson don't, but neither does Miami technically. And just because Florida State and Clemson seem like worse programs last year, Miami was a bigger draw. That doesn't seem like a long-term thing. So I'm actually cold on Miami. Moving up, Georgia Tech. Similar to Miami, I'm cold on them. Maybe better last year, but again, it's not like they have a new market advantage that Florida State and Clemson don't have. I mean, they're in Atlanta. Georgia is already in that market. The Bulldogs. Georgia Tech has already left the SEC once, even as a program on the rise. I just don't see them getting there. North Carolina. I'm hot on them. I think the SEC is going to see way more value in North Carolina than they will the other school, the Florida State or Clemson, particularly by 2031 when North Carolina could surpass, and yes, I mean surpass Florida State and Clemson in football value. So, that's I know that's an unpopular thing to think about, but yeah, North Carolina is definitely on my list. If we're talking about hot or cold, who has a better chance? Duke. I'm hot on Duke. And that's because they're tied to North Carolina. And I think the SEC, if they were told they have to take Duke to get North Carolina, I think they'd make that move. I do. I think they would accept it. I think they would take Duke with them. Virginia. I'm actually cold on Virginia. They're actually a hot program right now, but as the basketball program wanes over the next few years, it's not the same program it was under Tony Bennett. That revenue that I said they're bringing in won't be there. However, Virginia Tech, I'm hot on them. I think the SEC would go for Virginia Tech. I think the SEC would go for Virginia Tech because of what I just talked about. SMU, I'm cold on them. I don't think SMU brings anything of value to the table. Last year was a flash in the pan. And Louisville, I'm cold on them. There's nothing extra they bring. So Virginia Tech, North Carolina, and Duke are the three schools I think the SEC would entertain adding before they added Florida State and Clemson. So I'm sorry, I'm hotter on those three schools than Florida State and Clemson. Here's Florida State and Clemson's best chance to get to the SEC, though, and this is something that we have to talk about. The SEC's bad TV deal is going to hurt them in poaching the ACC. And poaching the ACC, particularly with the schools they prefer for this reason. The Big Ten, once this revenue exit fee decrease kicks in 2031, the Big Ten will be negotiating a new TV deal. They'll have a lot more money to offer schools and to pay the exit fees. They also have the academic selling point as the one that only wants AAU schools. You could theoretically see the Big Ten go for North Carolina, and if Virginia is rolling at that time, they might go for Virginia too. And they would get those schools before the SEC would. Then they would get Duke. Okay, North Carolina, Duke, and Virginia could all go to the Big Ten before the SEC was, before they go to the SEC, and the Big Ten would be a better draw for them. If that happens, the SEC will then be forced to take Florida State and Clemson to compete. But the problem is the Big Ten can still get into the Florida market because they could get Miami. And maybe just for continuity purposes, they would add Georgia Tech at that point to get into the Atlanta market. And the SEC, out of desperation, has to take Florida State and Clemson, and maybe even Louisville, and definitely Virginia Tech. And just to get into the North Carolina market, maybe take NC State. That's not crazy to think about. All I'm saying is the best chance for Florida State and Clemson to guarantee themselves a spot in the SEC by 2031 is for the Big Ten to poach the ACC before the SEC does and be more successful, and that's a very strong possibility. But we're going to see how it plays out. But you can book it. They're all leaving the ACC by 2031. The show represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, play to win, why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com, live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. Ted Russell Ford Lincoln is your home for the finest vehicles in Knoxville, new and used, East Tennessee's largest Ford and Lincoln volume dealer. I want to thank all you guys for tuning in today and dealing with me, with Dave out with the sinus infection. Apologies. Hope he's back tomorrow. Had a lot of fun. And with Caleb Calhoun, this has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports. Hit that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment. Ring the bell. Turn your notifications on. Tell a friend, okay? We want all the support we can get. Again, we love doing this show with you every day, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio, represented by Banks and Jones. Once again, with Caleb Calhoun, this has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports. You guys